All right, should we let people in now? It's 12. Okay, I'll go ahead and admit all.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're just playing the game of admitting everybody in. We'll be starting in just a minute. Good morning, Laura. Thanks for dropping that in the chat. If you all would like to share a little bit about where you're from, that would be awesome. We have 206 as of this morning registered to attend, so we're very excited for today's event. So if you'd like to just share where you're from in the chat, that would be wonderful. Edmonton and Montreal, we're getting almost coast to coast. Saskatchewan right in the middle. Aurora, Ontario. I haven't heard of that community before. What a beautiful name. There we go, right from BC. We got one coast. I wonder if we have anyone from the other side of the continent, or the country, I should say. We've just got a few more coming in, so we're just going to start here in another minute. If you want to just share where you're from, just a little bit of an icebreaker, letting us say hello to everyone.
Ooh, Saudi Arabia. Wow.
Maybe we are going across to another continent. Hey, that's awesome.
Amazing. Amazing. Snowy Regina. Yes, I'm in Regina and it is snowy.
I am in Saskatchewan, just north of the US border. So we're right on the edge of the big storm, just enough to still get to go out and shovel. Before we started the meeting, we were talking about the weather, and we always said, well, you know, whenever you need to fill in that silence, if you're from Canada, you talk about the weather. So that's part of what we're doing. We got lots of people coming in, still fast and furious. So we're just letting everybody in here. It's kind of like when you open the doors to the meeting room and everyone is making their way in, finding their seats, saying hello to people they haven't seen for a while. Well, we can pretend we're doing that today. All right, Keri, well, we're at about 4 minutes after the top of the hour, and it looks like we have a pretty awesome group here today. I'll continue to monitor as we let people in, but I think maybe in respect of everyone's time, let's get started. So I'd like to begin by welcoming you all to today's presentation from Women in Leadership on how leaders can influence corporate culture. So I will begin with our land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge the city of Regina is on traditional lands of the Treaty 4 territory, a territory signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis First Nation. Welcome and thank you for joining us for How Leaders Can Influence Corporate Culture. Before we get started, Please use the chat, not the Q&A, but the chat to ask us questions. I'll be making sure to monitor that. And this presentation will be recorded and uploaded to our Women in Leadership website following this event. I'm Leanne. I'm your host for today. I'll introduce Keri here in a minute, but just before that, just a little bit of a plug, I guess, to please visit the womeninleadership.ca website to learn more. And we do invite you to become WIL, how we affectionately call it, members and subscribe to our e-newsletter because it's free. And one more thing, you can look us up on any of your many social media channels like Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and find a chapter in the province where you are. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Keri. Keri Schwebius is a certified executive coach and consultant with a Master of Arts in Leadership. She works with organizations and achieving high individuals who want to create better workplaces through effective leadership. She holds accreditations in change management, emotional intelligence, and team building. Keri has a genuine desire to make a positive change in the world, working with clients as co-chair of Women in Leadership Saskatchewan and as chair of the board of directors of City Kidz Regina. Welcome, Keri.
Thank you, Leanne. And I'm so happy to see so many people on today and lots of familiar faces. So I very much appreciate you joining me today. I am really excited to talk about culture, organizational culture, and leadership. I am passionate about leadership, and I feel like I could talk about culture for hours and hours. And so I've compressed a whole bunch of stuff into today. So we'll move pretty quickly through it, but I want you to ask questions when you have them, like Leanne said, in the chat, or if you're feeling courageous today, you can jump on your mic and speak up and ask questions. And you know, let me know if there's anything that you're curious about or anything that's not clear. But I am just going to dive right in here and start sharing. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about what is culture and why is it important. I'm going to talk about big picture. So from an organizational perspective, what does it mean to influence culture? And then, because not everybody is a CEO or on the executive and has that broad influence, I'm going to talk about as a leader to your employees, how can you impact culture? And then I just have a few slides about what it means in a virtual or hybrid workplace that we're in these days. So this is Peter Drucker, and he is the known as the father of management thinking. And he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So what does this mean? It means you can have the best strategy, you can have an amazing product in an amazing location, but at the end of the day, you need people, and people are complicated. They're emotional and they demonstrate behaviors that you can't always predict. But if your people are engaged in the work they do and they feel valued by their leaders, if they feel like they have something to contribute, then they'll treat each other and you, and most importantly, your customers well. So what is corporate culture? Well, the best way I've ever heard it explained is corporate culture is how we do things around here. And it happens either by default or by design. So I would argue that there are many, many organizations out there who have a culture by default. It doesn't mean it's a bad culture. It just means that no focus or effort or energy has been expended in creating a particular culture. The people might all be lovely and nice and treat each other with respect, but it just happened that way, or you hired the right people into the culture. When you think about culture, though, because it has such a big impact on your success as an organization, it's really important to take some time to think about what is the culture that we want and be intentional about that. So here are some very interesting stats. I brought these from a bunch of different places. The first one is from a Gallup study. So Gallup does a report that's called State of the Global Workplace, and they've been doing this for many years. So in the most recent one, which was in 2021, they found that only 20% of employees are engaged at work. So this is worldwide, but in Canada and the US, it's a little bit higher. It's about 35 or 34. So that means that there are still 66% of employees who are not fully engaged in their work. That's a lot of people. Another stat is that managers account for at least 70% in the variance in employee engagement. So what does that mean is if you have a really great manager and great employee engagement, great, you're up at that higher end, but it could be a 70% difference between that lower end where there is poor leadership and poor engagement. So that's a huge gap. So leadership definitely impacts employee engagement and culture. Another stat is that,
good. How are you?
Sorry, I'm getting some background. Okay. The other stat is that 58% of employees would stay at a lower paying job if it meant working for a great boss. So what does this tell us? That people really like having strong leaders, having effective leaders, people that they like working for. This is really important. And then the last stat, and this is incredible. This was a study.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Okay, yes, I can hear you.
Hi,
so
just
yeah,
as a
I talked
reminder,
with Cindy yesterday too.
I just muted whomever that was. Just as a reminder, please make sure that all of your lines are on mute. Just kind of throws Keri off to include that part of the conversation in her presentation. Thanks, everyone. Sorry, Keri, back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so the last one. This was a study that was done by the Harvard Business School, and they studied for over a decade and found that organizations with a strong culture could actually increase their net income, so not revenues, but net income, 756% over 11 years. So just imagine that kind of growth. So we'll start with the big picture organizational culture. And the best place to start is to really get clear on what is the current culture? What's our starting point? Anytime when you think about change management, you think of where we are and then that messy middle period of change and where you want to be. So where are you right now? How do we do that? Well, you have to be honest with yourself and think about what's really good about our culture. What are the things that make our culture great, and how do we retain those things? And then what are those bad parts of the culture? Maybe those things you want to tweak or change. And then what are those absolutely horrible things about our culture that we want to get rid of altogether? And the other thing to think about, especially from a leadership perspective, is what are our blind spots? What are the things that we can't see from where we are in the organization? And how are we going to reveal those things? So many organizations will do culture surveys. So there are employee engagement or culture surveys. And that will give you a piece of the data. And I would suggest that if you really want to get serious about changing your culture or evolving your culture, that you're going to have to go deeper than just the survey, because that's just really a starting point. And so do things like interviews with employees, do some focus groups, and find out, why you're getting some of the answers you might be getting in your corporate surveys. So once you have a really clear picture of where we are, what we want to keep and what we want to change, think about what kind of culture do we want to create. So if you think that culture is how we do things around here, then think about how do we want to do things around here. And also it's important to consider, how does that culture and the desired culture that we have envisioned, how does that support the implementation of the strategy, of our business strategy? And also something to think about is how does it align with our industry? So I'll use innovation, for example. Lots of organizations say we want to be innovative, we want a culture of innovation, which is fantastic, but it might be more effective in, say, for example, a tech organization than another industry that's maybe highly regulated and there's not as much room for innovation or making mistakes, because we know to be innovative, you got to make mistakes. So how does what culture you're trying to create fit in with the industry and the regulations and the environment that you have to work within? So you get your clear picture, you have some words, this is the culture we want, and there are all kinds of options here. But what's really important is not so much the words, but what they mean and what are the behaviors that are aligned with those words. So just to give you kind of a better picture about this, I'm going to give you some examples here. So I talked about innovation, and we say we want a culture of innovation. Well, that requires certain behaviors. One of those behaviors is actually giving employees the time and the resources to experiment, to try new things. Because if you're going to be innovative, we know that you're not always going to get it right the first time. So you need some space for experimentation. And then when things fail, that has to be okay. So there shouldn't be any kind of repercussions for failure within an innovative company. And then the company has to be comfortable with a certain level of risk. And then the next one I've got here is diversity. So what does that mean? Well, it means you recruit and promote diverse people, but you also create space for different perspectives. So just hiring these people isn't enough, but allowing them to share their different perspectives. And then educating the managers about inclusion. What does inclusion mean? What does that look like? How are they implementing diversity in the workplace? And then review your policies and procedures. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then celebrate differences. So whatever those words or that desired culture you want to be clear about what are the behaviors that align with that. What are the behaviors that you want people to demonstrate? And then you identify the gaps. So you have a clear picture of where you are, and then you're getting closer to where you want to be in terms of culture. And then the important part is to have a plan. So if culture eats strategy for breakfast, then you probably want a plan for culture as well as a strategic plan. And intentions are great, they're nice, but actions actually make things happen. So how do you do that? Closing the gap, it starts at the top. And I'll dive into each of these a little bit more. It has to start at the top. You have to communicate. What are those behaviors, expected behaviors? And then hold people accountable to those behaviors. And also, what's really important, and you will never get the culture you want unless you have trust and transparency within the organization. So let's talk about these a little bit more. When you create expectations around what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior, it won't matter at all unless the leaders demonstrate behaviors. So remember, culture is how we do things around here, not what we say around here. So a company can say, we want a culture of transparency, but if the leaders in charge are not transparent, if they withhold information, then the culture that you're going to get is a culture of secrecy. I once worked with an organization that said, we want a fair culture. Everybody has the same opportunities and it's a fair process. But on several occasions, they would actually appoint people into leadership positions rather than having the fair recruitment process and application process. And there were quite obviously favorites in the organization, people who were given opportunities when others weren't. And this was obvious to all the other employees. So the culture that they wanted, this fair culture, never came to be. It was a culture of favoritism. So let's talk about communication. If you want people to behave a certain way, if you want them to demonstrate the behaviors that are going to contribute to your positive culture, then you need to tell them what's expected of them. And you can do this in a whole bunch of ways. So what does the CEO say when you have town hall meetings or any meetings? What's on your annual report? What's on your intranet? What are the ways that you're communicating those expected behaviors with your employees? Or the things that are hung on the wall, the plaques on the wall, what do they say? What do they tell people? And not only that, but the policies and procedures that you have in place, because those lay out a lot of the behaviors that you expect. So for example, if you are trying to have a culture of safety, you have to have actual policies and procedures in place that will keep people safe. And then further to this is, how do we celebrate in the organization, and what do we celebrate? What are the stories that we tell? And how does that align with those behaviors that we're trying to reinforce? And then accountability. This is probably the hardest piece, because when you create expectations and then you communicate with your employees what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, it doesn't matter unless you hold them accountable. And that includes yourself and all the leaders. If people are not held accountable, then what will happen is the culture will be whatever behavior is accepted. When they're allowed to demonstrate disrespectful behavior without any consequences, then the culture becomes one of disrespect. This is so challenging, especially when it comes to addressing bad behaviors, or if you've got an employee who's really good at their job, but when it comes to culture and some of those maybe softer skills, they're a little weak. So how do you address that? It's really tricky. I'm going to do a little poll here and see who is comfortable having those difficult conversations and holding people accountable. Oh, some people love that. Good. Awesome. I don't like it, but I do it anyway. That seems to be the winner. Good. Just a few people who don't like having them. I love that I'm seeing that nobody is saying I'm terrible at them and I will avoid them at all costs. I don't feel equipped. Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll just give you a couple seconds to pop in your answer here. Okay, so the majority of the group are uncomfortable with them, but we'll do them. That's great. That's good. Okay. Okay, so moving on here. After accountability, trust and transparency. So as you are doing all of these things, so starting at the top, having the leaders demonstrate the behavior, communicating what's acceptable, desired, and unacceptable from your employees, and holding people accountable, you'll start to create that trust and transparency. And it's really important to maintain that while you're working on culture, because employees can see through you. So if you're saying one thing and doing another, they're going to notice. They're going to pay attention to that. They're watching all the time. So trust and transparency is really important. So that's kind of the big picture in terms of culture and how we influence. But I know that, many of us aren't in that role where we have that broad influence. And so I really wanted to spend some time talking about me as a leader with my direct team. How do I influence culture? And the other thing to think about here, I once talked about culture with a group of doctors, and hospitals and health systems are huge, huge, huge systems and involve many different people. And they said to me, there's no way I could influence the culture in this whole system. And so I always make the comparison to how do you eat an elephant? It's really just one bite at a time. And so when you start with what you can control, what's within your area of influence, then that's a good starting point. And other people will start to notice, this is what's happening in that team. That looks really good. What are you doing over there? So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to take you back to Psychology 101 here and talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think many people are familiar with this, but really this is his theory and observations and ideas about human needs and how, when those needs are met, they influence a person's motivation. So let's consider this hierarchy of needs in our workplaces. If you look at the bottom there, those two levels, the basic needs, most companies are fulfilling those basic needs. We're giving people a paycheck. They can afford, a place to live, food on the table. Most of that stuff is provided by an organization. And then many organizations move into that next two levels of psychological needs, either by design or by default. So there's some kind of sense of connection or belonging. You're part of the team. You might have a certain level of respect in your organization. And then if we look at the top, self-actualization, I would say fewer organizations do this, but some do, and some leaders are really good at this. But this is when these needs are being met, people perform at their full potential. So just think about that for a minute. When people find meaning in their work, when they have purpose, when there are opportunities to learn and grow, which is self-actualization, they work to their full potential. So here's another quick poll. I'm just curious to know. Oh, did I leave that poll up the whole time? Okay. In your company, if you had to guess how many people are at the top of that hierarchy, what percentage would you say are those people that are working right to their full potential? Okay, looks like we have most of the answers in, so I'll share this with you. So you'll see the 25% or the low, this is the majority of responses. And if you think about that data from Gallup at the beginning that I shared, that only 34% of employees are fully engaged in this work, this aligns here. So we're looking at about 25, about a quarter of your organization. People are really invested. They're working at their full potential and they're doing a great job. Okay, so I just want to dig into these a little bit more. So if we look at the psychological needs and take a look at this area of love and belonging, people get a little bit skeptical when I talk about love in leadership. But leaders who are the best leaders, leaders who you really want to work for, who inspire and motivate you, truly care about their employees. So call it love, call it care, whatever that is. They care about the people on their team and they care about those people achieving success. And people need to feel like they belong and they want to feel safe, and not just physically safe, but psychologically safe. They need to know that they matter, that the work that they do is important and valued. So as a leader, I want you to think about what are your behaviors and your relationships with your employees in terms of giving them a sense of love and belonging. So what are you doing to nurture trusting relationships with your employees? Is your communication with employees two-way? Are you listening more than you're talking? Is there mutual respect? As a leader, what are you doing within your team to contribute to their feelings of belonging to the team? How often do you connect with employees, informally or formally? When it comes to the pandemic, so many of us had to shift and our employees were spread all over the place and we didn't have that daily face-to-face contact. So what effort were we making to talk to our employees on a regular basis and make that connection? And then do you create formal and informal ways to connect with employees? And then we're going to move up to esteem. And esteem encompasses not just how people see themselves, so self-esteem, but also how they perceive that others see them. So esteem, self-esteem, and then that validation from outside. So whether that's social acceptance, admiration, status, any kind of respect from other people within the groups that they're part of. As leaders, how are you meeting the esteem needs of your employees? What do you do to regularly recognize your employees for small things and big things in their work, formally, informally? How much autonomy are you giving employees in terms of how they do their work on a day-to-day basis? Do you empower them to make decisions and not just delegate work, but empower them, give them all the information and the knowledge and the support they need to make those decisions? Do you accept people for who they are? As a leader, what are you doing to support the development of your employees? What opportunities are you giving them to learn and grow and be better? In what ways are you investing in their success? So I just want to take a minute here and talk a little bit about psychological safety, because these last two levels on the hierarchy talk about psychological needs. And psychological safety is a big term that is very popular these days. And so I'm just going to do a little exercise to talk a little bit about that. So at this moment, I just want you to close your eyes and I want you to imagine that I'm going to send you on a trip. And it is going to be the most amazing trip you've ever been on, to a beautiful tropical location where you will have people serving you and taking care of you, and you can relax and do whatever it is you want. And it's far away from the terrible weather we've all been having across the country and all the snow. Okay, now I want you to open your eyes. This is the plane that's going to take you on this trip. And I want you to answer this next poll. Who is getting on this plane? Yep, I'd rather live. Sure, me too. Okay, let a few more people answer the poll and then I'll share the results. All right, so most of us would say, no way, I'm not getting on that plane. A few brave souls are saying, yeah, I'm getting on, I'm getting out of here. And then some comedians in the group, if they get upgraded to first class. And the reason is that there are some perceived risks and real risks of getting on this plane. When it comes to the workplace, or speaking up or contributing your ideas or making a mistake, there are some perceived risks from an employee's perspective. They might feel like they'll be judged. Maybe they'll be ridiculed. They might lose out on opportunities for promotions or to work on special projects. They might be afraid of being reprimanded, or worse, losing their job. So these are the risks. When we talk about psychological safety, these are the risks that people perceive and why they often don't speak up or contribute their ideas. So how do we eliminate these risks? Authenticity, open and honesty. And as a leader, sometimes we feel like we have to have all the answers and we have to be right all the time. But actually, it's better to engage the employees to come up with their own answers. We want to ask for and be open to feedback. How am I doing as a leader? Am I supporting you in the way that you need to be supported? What could I be doing better? Be transparent. Curiosity. This is a big one. If you're talking with your employees, are you curious about what do they want? What do they hope to achieve? Where do they want to grow? What are the opportunities that they'd like to see? Help them learn from their mistakes. So this is, in terms of giving feedback, how do we help them to learn from things rather than reprimanding them for something that's gone wrong? And then creating opportunities for engagement, giving them the space to contribute. Another stat for you here, in 2015, Google released the results. They did a 2-year study of their teams. And what they found was that psychological safety was the single most important factor impacting performance. So teams with higher psychological safety were more engaged. And when employees are more engaged, that translates into better performance. So that's why I wanted to talk a little bit more about psychological safety and how we can create that in our teams. Okay, and then we hit the top of the pyramid of the hierarchy of needs. And when we find meaning and purpose in our work, when we have opportunities to grow and learn, which is self-actualization, we work to our full potential. It's not about perfection, and it also looks different for every person. And sometimes you can be there and then come down again to lower in the hierarchy, depending on where you are and what you're working on. So as leaders, here are some things that you can do to support self-actualization in your teams. Regularly communicate the mission, the vision, the purpose of the company, and then create that line of sight between the employee and that mission. So what is it that they're doing that contributes to what the company is trying to achieve? How do they fit in? What are the opportunities that we're giving our employees to learn and grow? So a lot of leaders or organizations feel like we have to promote an employee to make them happy, to keep them engaged. And sometimes that's hard because sometimes you don't have a position to promote them into. But if you give them opportunities to, say, participate in a special project, or even to be part of meetings and discussions that they wouldn't normally be able to participate because of where they fall in the hierarchy, that is an opportunity for them to learn, to grow, to be engaged. So that is sometimes as good as a promotion if you don't have a promotion to offer? Do you give employees honest feedback that helps them to get better, that helps them to grow? Are your employees comfortable with the unknown because you have developed a community of trust where people know that you have their best interests at heart? And that makes them more resilient when things change so quickly. And then, do you encourage employees to look at challenges creatively? So rather than the leader that swoops in with all the answers, how do you create that environment where employees can, work together and come up with creative solutions for things? So this is a new slide. I just found this the other day from Gallup, talking about the past and the future of employee engagement and how things are changing. So I found this really lovely, concise way to show this to you. So I wanted to share it with you. And people are looking today more at, why am I here? How does my role make a difference to the organization, to the community? So what's my purpose versus what's my paycheck? Now, paycheck's still important, but purpose is a big deal too. In the past, we talked about employee satisfaction. Are you happy with your salary? Are you happy with your benefits? Do you have a nice parking space? The future is more about, how am I going to grow in this organization? What are the opportunities I'm going to be given to learn, to try new things, to become better? In the past, we talked about boss or the manager. Now we talk about my coach, my leader. And that ties back to development as well. How is this person supporting my development? Instead of the annual performance review, we're talking about ongoing conversations, that ongoing feedback that helps me to grow and get better. And then rather than, working on weaknesses, focusing on my strengths. How do I leverage my strengths? And then, of course, in this day and age with all this connectivity, we know we can be at work 24/7 if we wanted to. People are thinking about, how do I figure out this work-life integration? How do I manage to have a life as well as a job? So just some different perspectives on how we look at work these days. Okay, I'm just going to pause here for a second and see how we're doing. And if anybody's got any questions or thoughts.
Hi, Keri. There's just a few that are mentioning that there's a couple of random popping sounds. I'm not sure if that's just too close to the mic that it might be, or if it's just individual audio. Not sure what we can do about it, but just wanted to let you know that we heard what you're saying, and hopefully we'll be able to continue on.
Yes, I'm not sure what that popping sound is. I apologize for that. Oh, we're getting audio is fine too. Okay, good. Okay, so I'd like to say post-pandemic, but it just doesn't seem to end. So we'll just call it culture in a hybrid workplace or in a virtual workplace, whatever that is these days. So this is some research that has been going on throughout the pandemic, and learning about what employees want. And I think we've heard of the Great Resignation, and we know that employees are leaving. And one of the reasons that they're leaving is because they want more flexibility. And this just shows how many people are looking for a hybrid work model, even after the pandemic. And there's a lot of people who would like at least some kind of flexibility. And so the trick is, well, how do we manage culture when we're not all physically together? And really, it's about connection. So culture by design versus culture by default. So when you're all in the same office, when you can see each other every day, there is a certain level of culture that is created by default because you interact with each other on a regular basis. If you want to create or recreate that culture in a hybrid or virtual workspace, you need to do it intentionally, and you need to create opportunities for connection, opportunities for people to talk not just about the work, but also about each other, that personal connection in addition to that work connection. So creating those opportunities for people to connect is really important. The other thing I want you to think about in terms of culture in a hybrid or virtual environment is this concept of unconscious bias. We already know that unconscious bias exists, but when we take a look at those stats a couple slides back, we found that women are actually choosing more often than men to have that flexibility or work from home. Quite often more women handle the responsibilities at home. And so it makes sense that they would want more time at home to manage that and balance with their job as well. So when it comes to promotions, then we have to be really aware of our bias for physical presence. So those people who are making the choice to work virtually will have the same opportunities as those who are showing up to work physically when it comes to, promoting an advancement. So being aware of that unconscious bias. And then the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to culture and in a virtual hybrid, again, just as it is when you're all in person, it's the leadership behaviors. So what are the behaviors? What are you holding people accountable to? That's what's going to drive your culture. And it doesn't change whether you're all together or whether you're spread out. Okay, I just want you to take 1 minute. We spent almost 50 minutes together today, and I've shared a whole bunch of ideas with you. I want you to just jump in the chat and share one idea or one concept that you are taking away from our webinar today. Importance of psychological safety. Yep. Speak up. Conversations. Yes. Intentional opportunities for connection. Lovely. Sharon says lead by example. You bet. Creating those connections. Yep. Trust and transparency. Awesome. Connecting the job to the mission for sure. Express his opinions. Absolutely. Awesome. Work is like another family. You have to nurture it. Yes. Yes. Culture takes work for sure. Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking about this. I love talking about culture and leadership. And if you want to learn more about me or about the work that I do, that's my website. I have a bi-weekly newsletter that I share. I like to keep them short and sweet, but I talk all about leadership in them. So if you're interested, you can sign up for that on my website. But thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I really appreciate it. Back to you, Leanne.
Thank you very much. And for anyone who might be interested, Keri is also an author. I am going to drop a link in the chat for an Amazon. It's an Amazon link if you're interested. She has a book called Mind the Gap, Navigating Your Leadership Journey. Keri wasn't quite sure about talking about this here, but I said, you know what, whenever I attend a conference or a session, I always like to have some kind of something if I'm really interested and I'd like to learn more. So I just wanted to provide that to you so you could learn some more. So with that, thank you, Keri. That was just fantastic. For all of you, you would like to know, we do have some upcoming events. Thursday, April the 21st, our partner speaker series, Beyond Beauty, Innovation, Leadership, and Resilience, is at 9 a.m. Pacific time. We have another coming up Thursday, May the 5th, a career development webinar on negotiation, the conversation art of asking for more. Our speaker series is presented by the Will Victoria Chapter, a conversation on compensation, Tuesday, May 17th. And we're really excited. Keri and myself are co-chairs of the Will Saskatchewan Chapter, along with Veronica is also co-chair, and we are inviting you to our inaugural event on building your network and being inspired with a panel of inspirational women from our province. Thursday, May 12th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 12 o'clock Saskatchewan time. So we'd like to extend our thanks to all of you for spending almost the whole hour with us. We do again invite you to stay connected, become a Will member, visit us on womeninleadership.ca, follow us on social media, and always you can stay connected.
Awesome. If anybody wants to hang out and ask any questions, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Jacqueline, I see and hear you say the website says we need a password.
For womeninleadership.ca, you should be able to join or to connect. You may need to, if you're signing up, perhaps for the e-newsletter,